Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the April Executive Committee meeting of the Community Oversight Board. Start with reading of the appeal statement. Pursuant to the provisions of Section 2.68030 of the Metropolitan laws, please take notice that decisions of the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County Community Oversight Board may be appealed to the Chancery Court of Davidson County for review under a common law writ of cert. Any appeal must be filed within 60 days after entry of a final decision by the board. Any person or other entity considering an appeal should consult with an attorney to ensure that time and procedural requirements are met. I'll establish quorum. I'm going to do roll call. Mr. Campbell-Gooch, he's not with us yet. Mr. Goddard.
Here.
And Dr. Kong.
Here.
Thank you. I'll move to for the electronic meeting statement.
Great. The proposed agenda constitutes essential business of this body, and meeting electronically is necessary for the health, safety, and well-being of Tennesseans in light of the COVID-19 outbreak. I also want to remind the members of this committee that prior to speaking, unless recognized by the chair by name, each member should state their name prior to speaking. Chair Martinez, we'll just need a member to make a motion to accept the electronic meeting statement, a second, and then an affirmative vote in order to continue in this format.
Thank you, Mr. Claus. Is there a motion?
Joe Brown, I so move.
This is Drew. I second.
Mr. Brown, I don't vote for this one because you're not a part of the executive committee.
Oh,
correct there.
In that case, I changed mine to a motion then.
And
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Kong. Discussion. Not Mr. Campbell-Gooch, not with us yet. Mr. Goddard.
Aye.
And Dr. Kong.
Aye.
All right. Thank you, everyone that had a chance to look at the minutes. And if you have any edits to the minutes, let me know. If not, I'll take a motion to approve those as well.
So move. This is Drew again.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard.
I second.
Thank you, Dr. Kong. Any focused discussion? Not. Mr. Campbell-Gooch, I don't know if you've joined us yet. Third.
Aye.
And Dr. Kong.
Aye.
Aye as well. So I'm going to move right into our agenda here since we have a guest. Councilmember Rosenberg will be discussing his legislation regarding license plate readers. So Councilmember Rosenberg, it's all yours.
thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. And thanks to all y'all for the opportunity to speak to you today. There is some very dangerous legislation pending before the council right now related to license plate readers. But there's also a piece of alternative legislation that would instead improve our citizen protections. So I'd like to share a little information and some thoughts with you. Of course, license plate readers, they're surveillance devices. They can photograph the back of your car. They can photograph the car's occupants. They scan your license plate and they place those photos in the database alongside your plate number and the location, date, and time you were there. Fixed position license plate readers, the ones that would be attached to a pole or something else along the side of the road, are banned under a Metro ordinance that I sponsored and the council overwhelmingly approved back in 2017. Mobile LPRs, the ones that are mounted onto or could be used from within law enforcement vehicles, which to my knowledge are not being used in Nashville right now, are legal, and there really aren't any guardrails around those. So, first off, there are a lot of dangers with LPRs. As of right now, it's all public record. Anything that's recorded on an LPR and retained is public record. There's some pending state legislation that would hide this information from being obtained by the public, but only temporarily. even if that were to pass as it stands right now, which means that the database on every citizen's movement who works, lives, or travels around these LPRs would for now be available to all Tennessee residents to obtain, including would-be stalkers, harassers, and other criminals. Could also be used to target individuals, understand what the traffic patterns are around certain locations at certain times, or even surmise when particular homes are most likely to be vacant. In addition, the data from LPRs are often faulty. The Vallejo, California Police Department actually analyzed data from fixed LPRs and found that 37% of their hits were misreads of the plates, more than 1 in 3. So there was one misread that took place in Aurora, Colorado not long ago that led police to stop 4 children as young as 6 years old at gunpoint and force them to lay face down on the pavement, just based on an errant LPR hit. And they also represent a real enhancement of police power. The stories where police power are used for good are great, but we really don't know what our police department or the mayor's office that controls it will look like in the future. Recall that last summer, felony warrants were issued and subsequently recalled against 2 activists in a really embarrassing and terrifying episode. The chief who oversaw that is gone, but the same system is in place today. And there are loads of examples of misuse. In Virginia, at the request of the federal government, law enforcement used license plate readers to determine and retain the data on who attended political rallies. There's an LPR company called Vigilant Solutions who's been active in Nashville lately. They have contracted with ICE to share the data captured by its LPR network, which ICE then uses to target immigrants. They have just really remarkable quantities of data that they have partnered to pass along. And there's a bunch of local police departments from across the country that share their data with ICE, even when it's in violation of local privacy laws. So if we pass laws, not only do we have a privacy protection for these, but still allow them, not only do we need to worry about whether they'll be followed, but anything that we do in that area can be easily preempted by our state legislature. Law enforcement agencies have used LPRs to surveil Muslim communities. In New York, police targeted mosque parking lots and nearby streets with LPRs. They're used to target suspected gang members by using lists that are notoriously unreliable. They rely on vague, contradictory information. They include huge numbers of names, overwhelmingly people of color who can't challenge their inclusion on the list. In Chicago, an evaluation, the Inspector General found that those entries really changed how officers perceive and treat the people that they interact with. In another incident, a police lieutenant in Washington pleaded guilty to using LPR data to blackmail patrons of a bar frequented by members of the LGBT community. The AP found countless instances of police abuse of databases where they blew off their own safeguards and policies to track love interests and journalists and the like. And then the U.S. Department of Justice even found significantly lower levels of trust in police among subjects who learned that law enforcement was using license plate readers versus a control group. At the same time, the benefits of LPRs are vastly overstated. If you're hoping to catch somebody who's on your bad guy list and there's a hit on an LPR, there needs to be an officer right there to respond before the bad guy makes a turn and is lost. And in Nashville, with our size and the size of our force, it's pretty rare in most parts of town that there's an officer right nearby. You're also going to be driving criminals' behavior. Many will be unaware of the LPR's existence, but others are going to take evasive action. You take neighborhood streets instead of arteries. You steal plates more often to stay ahead of the hot list, the bad guy list. or you can buy license plate covers and license plate sprays that obscure your plate from LPRs. So the legislation, Bill 2025-82, that was sponsored by Councilmember Johnston, opens the door wide open for LPRs right off the bat. No easing into it, no protections that will really hold much meaning. And I think that it's pretty clear that once a surveillance network gets built, once we buy it all and put it all up, it's very unlikely to come back down. We have an alternative. It's a substitute bill to 582. I've sponsored it along with council members Sepulveda, Suara, Porterfield, O'Connell, and Benedict. And it does not allow the installation of any fixed LPRs. Instead, what it seeks to do is refine the laws that we have on the books, and also build some transparency and data collection around that so that we can decide what the best step is to take in the future. I can say that there's not going to be a day I'm in favor of license plate readers, but I think that everybody's more equipped to make better decisions by having some data available to them. So what the substitute does is it adds prohibitions on mobile LPRs by banning data retention at all. Right now, even though the mobile LPRs aren't being used yet, it's pretty much wide open how they could be used and how the data could be used. So this improves that by prohibiting any data retention at all. It limits the uses of the mobile LPRs to 4 specific things: to find stolen vehicles, to find vehicles associated with a missing or endangered person, to find vehicles registered to an individual with an outstanding felony warrant, and vehicles for which a probable cause search warrant has been issued related to a felony offense. So very narrow use without a lot of room for, they're pretty straightforward. The legislation, the substitute legislation also requires that officers visually confirm that the LPR hit was accurate, that the license plate actually matches what was read. And it also requires quarterly reporting to the Metro Council. It'll describe where the mobile LPRs are being used, for what purpose they're being used, and against whom they're being used. That will come to us every 3 months, and at that point, all of this can be refined to ensure that we're, for folks that feel that there's a real advantage to this, that there's an opportunity for some of those very narrow uses, but also where at the forefront is the protection of Nashvillians from excessive government surveillance. It's my hope that we can get this substitute passed. I think it's better and more protective than the status quo, and I'm hopeful, but I'm also really worried about what happens if something like 582 passes. I think that it's going to prove very dangerous very quickly, and I'd appreciate y'all's thoughts. Happy to answer any questions, or I'd certainly be thankful for your support on it moving forward.
Thank you, Councilmember Rosenberg. Questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Director.
One of the things that as I was looking over your bill, I just wanted to get some clarity in regards to the oversight of the LPRs and what you are proposing, whether it be auditing or however it is. I didn't really see anything regarding, keeping MMPD accountable and how that should look. Can you talk a little bit about that?
All right. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that question. I'd like to add when we put the final substitute forward, which will be a week from Friday, I'd like to add a little bit of that in. I'm a little bit wary about some of, I think that we should add that in there, and we're working on that language, especially with regard to ensuring that the public defender's office and the DA each have access to it and some say in the use. I did my best to build the protections around that were not dependent on the audit end, just because of the opacity that you sometimes see once things like this get built inside of the structure inside of a law enforcement agency. So I'd like to build a little bit in, and I'm seeking input from the ACLU. I'd appreciate your thoughts on that as well. But right now, I think that this version allows, I'm not sure if the version that was most recently filed includes the language about the public defender. And okay, here we go. So this version does guarantee that the DA or a designee and the public defender and the designee can examine and audit any LPR, any server used to store LPR data, and any records pertaining to the use of LPRs. And if either the DA or the public defender believes that an LPR has been used in violation of this section, either or both can send a letter to the Metro Council requesting suspension of the use of an LPR or LPRs for the purposes of investigation to prevent ongoing violations or deter future violations. And then the Metro Council would be able to grant that with a one reading resolution.
Mr. Hayes.
You're muted, Mr. Hayes.
Yeah, I was saying thank you for your presentation, especially the part about this information is public record, even though it's coming out of the readers as public record. And but I did want to ask, you said that this data is not retained, but clearly it has to be retained at least even for a short period of time. So what is it has to have some retention.
So thanks for that. So when it comes to the, of course, once we don't have, with no fixed LPRs, that part's not the concern. But as far as the mobile LPRs, there are some retention rules in here. First of all, so the records of a license plate read by an LPR cannot be recorded or transmitted outside the LPR system, and they have to be purged within 3 minutes of their capture in such a way that they are destroyed and are not recoverable unless it results in a match under one of those four things: stolen cars, endangered person, felony warrant, felony search warrant. At that point, it would be used. Then also, unless otherwise required by law, records of license plate that are matched, that cause an LPR hit, but then are proven to not meet one of those criteria, have to be gone within an hour. So if it shows, hey, this car is associated with a missing person, the officer goes, sees the license plate actually doesn't match, then that will happen within an hour, gives them time to locate the car, realize it's a mistake, move on. So there's nothing that's retained long-term unless it's part of an active case that meets these criteria.
Okay, thank you. And I do want to say, I do like the fact that you're saying the DA and also, I guess you said the public defender, you're looking at trying to actually give them access to the system, because I proposed this question to Councilmember Johnston when she did her presentation concerning is there any outside agency that monitors this rather than the police department? Do you know of any in your research? Are there any other cities that have an outside agency? But again, I'm glad to know that the DA and the public defender that kind of helps with that concern.
Yeah, thank you. So that portion of this and big pieces of it actually come from the New Hampshire state statute, which was written with the national ACLU. And then after I wrote my version, I met with the Tennessee ACLU and the person from national who helped with New Hampshire statute, and he helped refine that. That's the only location that I'm familiar with that has this kind of exact protect. In New Hampshire, it's the Attorney General and their whatever their equivalent is of the maybe the state public defender's office, but
right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Mr. Campbell-Gooch.
Yes. Before I ask my question, City Council members, can you list? I think you listed in a very succinct way a couple things that your bill does. I think one of them was like ban data retention, limit uses of LPRs. I want to make sure I got those all in my notes. Can you list those again?
Sure. Yeah. It's continuing to ban the fixed LPRs, which are currently not allowed in Nashville. It adds the prohibition on data retention. It adds the limitation of uses. Those are the things you just mentioned. It requires that an officer visually confirm that the LPR hit was accurate before making a stop. And it requires quarterly reporting on where these mobile LPRs are being used, for what purpose, and against whom. More specifically, as far as the reporting, what they would be reporting is the number of LPRs in use in total and per precinct, the number of matches that were made by an LPR, the number of matches that identified vehicles and individuals who were sought by law enforcement and that resulted in stops, the number of matches that resulted in a search of a vehicle or an individual, a release, an arrest, or other outcomes, the number of matches where it was determined that all the characters on the license plate were read correctly, and the number of matches where at least one character was misread on the license plate, and then any other information that is requested in the future by resolution.
Okay. Thank you for that. And like I will also say, like this is very different than Councilmember Johnston's license plate reader bill. But if you allow me to backtrack just like 1 second, and I came in late, so excuse my tardiness. But can you just, like, in plain English, why license plate readers? Because the reason why I'm asking is because I don't know what's going on, but it feels like there's already agreements that we need license plate readers. So I'm just curious from your perspective, if you could just talk to why license plate readers.
Absolutely. I'm speaking for other people because I don't like the idea of license plate readers. I think that it's a dangerous road to go down. I don't think it gets at the root of the issue that people are trying to solve. I think there's just, it's a real increase in police power. And I have trouble believing that that's where we are in this moment in history. People who are in support of them say that we don't have enough police officers in Nashville to deal with rising crime, and that this is a cheaper way of doing it, and that other people are doing it, so that Nashville should do it. I think that people, many of whom are well-meaning, are looking for a silver bullet, and think that this is going to help find stolen cars and that sort of thing in big numbers. And I think that if that's your singular focus, not only might you be missing the very detrimental impacts of license plate readers, but it's easy to recognize that their use is going to be very limited. If I have an LPR at the entrance to my neighborhood and it says that there's a stolen car that just drove by, to my knowledge, there are about 6 officers that are patrolling the West Precinct at any one time. And it's the second biggest precinct area in Nashville. There's probably not an officer within 10 minutes of here. So I don't see what's been solved. At the same time, we've opened this massive hole and a real opportunity for misuse or abuse. It does not take a lot of bad actors or even one bad actor to see things go wrong by introducing this kind of surveillance. I think that there's a combination of people who think that who are just very law and order types who support it, and others that are just looking for a solution and might be missing some of the drawbacks and overstated benefits in the effort to find answers.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. And I also appreciate your honesty in the situation. So is it, I just want to make sure I'm hearing this correctly. So is it that the majority of city council is already pretty much moving in this direction? So the spirit of this bill is to limit the amount of harm that the license plate readers can do. Am I understanding? That's what I'm taking away. I just want to make sure I understood that.
Yes and no. So when it comes to the fixed license plate readers, the infrastructure, this keeps everything as it is now. They're not allowed. Right now, we're already allowing the mobile license plate readers for any use the police want with no transparency, no limitations on the way they're used, no limit on data retention, nothing. And while my preference might be to just ban them outright, I don't think that that's a step that will have success right now. I think that if we only give the 2 choices right now between the Johnston bill and getting rid of mobile LPRs entirely, that we might end up with those. So I would say I don't believe that the council is sold on expanding LPRs in Nashville, but I'm skeptical that this council at this moment would be willing to completely get rid of the mobile LPRs. So I guess in a sense, the answer is yes. The effort here is to limit them as much as possible and eliminate as many of the sources of harm as possible.
This is just my last question. And so with that being said, if LPRs weren't on the table, what kind of resources would you suggest that would be used to solve the problems that are attempting to be solved through the surveillance? I don't know if I asked that question right.
I think that I think we need to see more community services provided by the city and through nonprofits, more in the way of violence interrupters, more direction for the things that the police department itself is focusing on, greater outreach, more mental health services. I think there's a long list that, I'm vaguely familiar with the concepts and that they're good ideas, but wouldn't hold myself up as an expert on by any means.
Thank you for those answers. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Cambridge. Any other questions for Councilmember Rosenberg? Dr. Kong.
Hi, Council Member. Thanks so much for presenting and giving all the information and answering our questions thus far. I haven't thought this all the way through, so I apologize if this question's sort of half-baked. But I'm curious, Mr. Hayes had an important question around audits, but I'm wondering if you're open or have thought about having more continuous and regular audits. It seems like currently it would be based on specifically request being made by a DA or someone, but it doesn't seem like there's an actual regular process incorporated. Is there openness to that? And if so, is there a specific agency or independent body you have in mind that would be in charge of that?
Thank you. I think that's a great idea, and I'd be open to any suggestions about where that should best live.
That's great. I actually have some thoughts on that, and maybe some text we could talk about, but I would love to discuss that further.
Yes, please.
I have another. This is Jill. Richard, I have another question, or more so a statement. I know that it seems to me that license plate readers are moving really quickly through council. And, one of the things that I think that is important, I think, especially to the community, is the crisis intervention teams. I think that there should be a lot more energy towards getting those implemented and funded, since we have, had several incidents where people who have suffered some type of mental health issue and the police were called. It seems like, in my opinion, that would be a priority over license plate readers. And so, do you know if that information is making its way through council? Or can you speak on it if you do know?
I'm not aware of any of that having been discussed. I've been a little bit surprised, really, at the resistance to limiting surveillance and that type of thing versus other solutions, and also been surprised by the appetite for this sort of thing. Prior to last term, we didn't have any sort of limitations on government surveillance, and the bill that we passed through council only had 2 no votes last time, including banning fixed LPRs and limiting most of the other types of surveillance around the city. And my sense coming into this term was that this council was going to be more receptive to more changes like that, and it hasn't been the case. I don't know why, but I'd like to see a lot more information flowing to council and a lot more of a push from the community or wherever it can come from for solutions that people can hold on to rather than reaching for something like LPRs.
Thank you.
Mr. Campbell-Gooch.
City Council member, I was definitely about to ask you what you think changed, but I don't want to ask that question. But you had mentioned vigilant solutions, and I know that was a part of Joyce Stiles' bill before when they were trying to put the license plate readers on a mobile unit and adding out to defer drivers. Do you know? And I asked Councilmember Johnson the same question. Like, when we get the LPRs, because it feels like it's going to happen no matter what. But when we get these LPRs, do you know if vigilant solutions will be used, or will things and I think also another there was mention of Safer Nashville, that group that supplies MMPD with their technology privately. So I'm just curious about, has there been any conversations about using vigilance, or because you did mention their work with ICE, or has there been any conversation around like Safer Nashville when it comes to like contracting these LPRs out and paying for them?
I don't know who the provider would be. The concept with the bill was that by not retaining any data, long enough for them to share it with ICE, that would hopefully get after that. Safer Nashville, I think, is kind of a puzzle. They're a nonprofit that just kind of popped up in October out of nowhere, and I'm not sure exactly. It seems like, and several council members, including Councilmember Johnston, are on their board. I'm not sure exactly. It seems like they were formed primarily to advocate for ramping up LPRs in Nashville, specifically out of South and Southeast. I can't imagine that they would have any kind of official role in this kind of thing, but I don't know who owns the mobile LPR units that, or who manufactured the ones that MNPD might already have, and whether Vigilant is involved at all.
Oh, thank you for that. And that was just a curiosity I had. And then I just wanted to follow it up with a comment. And the city council member, this isn't directed towards you, but it's definitely something that Jill kind of pointed to. I'm just curious on what it would look like, because we got a lot of issues. So I'm just curious on what it would look like if we address other issues in a similar way with this pace. It's been real fast. I mean, I think if we hadn't have called it in, I think November, then it wouldn't. We would have been had LPRs across the entire city at this point. So, like, I do appreciate the spirit of your bill. It just leaves me curious, what happens if we were willing to move this fast on, like, housing displacement, wage theft, and the ton of issues I probably could call off at the top of my head right now. So I do appreciate you coming here and answer these questions in such a frank manner, and I appreciate the spirit of this bill too.
Yeah, thank you. It's remarkable how quickly something grabs hold when it comes from one place versus another, when there are just all suddenly, when there are too many barriers, there need to be studies, and this needs to happen, that needs to happen, versus the original version of this bill that would just throw everything up overnight. It's what you said. I think it'd be pretty awesome if it happened the other way. I'd like to see. I don't know what it looks like exactly, but the council, including me, our feet being held to the fire a little bit on this kind of thing. When folks get loud, council members are more inclined to listen. And we need the education, frankly. I mean, it's a change in mentality for a lot of people, and there's just I think a big need for education for a lot of people to understand the mechanics behind other solutions. I think I have a huge knowledge gap, and would love to have much more information flowing to me and to other folks in the council, regarding the kind of solutions that you'd support.
Dr. Kong.
Hi, thanks again for answering all of our questions. I just had a few other thoughts specifically around the data that's being collected, and I appreciate that your bill's mentioning, having short retentions for the videos that are captured. But I'm not familiar at all with the mobile LPRs and their technology. But in terms of not the video, but where these LPRs are being placed, is that data captured anywhere? Is that being collected in any sense? Because I guess I think it's really important that if when audits are being performed, we should be tracking where these LPRs are being put, and are they specifically targeting vulnerable communities and neighborhoods? I'd really appreciate if that's mentioned in somewhere. And then also when any time that officers are looking into or tapping into the data being collected, I think that should be tracked as well. And then also, are these videos or data being used in any way to inform policing practices or algorithms, right? And how are these, just to be thinking through specifically how have the use of mobile LPR data impacted, historically vulnerable communities. I think just thinking through all these different pieces, because your bill's definitely starting in a very good place in that direction. But I'd love to just see that piece sort of called out more in our marginalized communities and how that impacts them.
Sure. And if you think any of the language needs beefing up, tell me. But so it does require that there be tracking of where they're used, which precincts are being used in, the population that they're being used against. We should probably add in some demographics on that as well. And then there's no data to be accessed after the fact. There would be the opportunity for an officer or whoever to add in that, this license plate is associated with a silver alert or a felony warrant or whatever. But that's the only data that exists is that list. And then the mobile LPR would throw an alert if it spotted that license plate. But nothing about that hit is being stored long-term. Only the fact, only that it was a hit, that it caught a license plate in this area or whatever, and the read was accurate or inaccurate. So I think that relieves the data auditing part of it. I think, we still need the auditing, like you talked about, to understand, so people can regularly see how they're being used beyond just the reporting that goes to council. But at least that data part gets pulled out.
Great. And then the last piece, I'd love to just plug in any sort of community involvement. I don't know if maybe there's a way to incorporate, like after a certain number of months, collecting community comments, just some way to be able to, especially communities that are being most impacted by this, and any feedback that they have to be able to improve the processes that are being incorporated.
I'll work on that.
And I just have one thing to add, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, Councilmember Rosenberg, but I noticed when I was listening in to Vigilant talk about their usage and their I guess their collaboration in San Francisco, they were talking about during this particular community meeting that the license plate readers were able to capture the entire back or the rear portion of the vehicle, which included not only the license plate, but it also included stickers, or it could also get any identifying information about the vehicle, as well as sometimes capture if there's how many people were in the vehicle. And so I was wondering if, your legislation, if there was any thought to making certain that adding language in there that would limit the use of facial recognition software, because I know that in certain cities they have coupled, body-worn cameras, as well as, I'm not sure if it's license plate readers, but there's been other biometric stuff that's been added. And so how would we protect the citizens of Nashville from, having that type of software added to this license plate reader software?
Councilmember O'Connell is actually working on facial recognition language separately to address the use of facial recognition technology in Nashville. And I'm certain that it'll speak to that, with regard to whether it's, body cameras or the cameras that they put up on, in Titan Stadium or in the middle of neighborhoods and other uses, and LPRs. In this case, since they're, and I guess that in this case, I'm sorry. In the case of these, I don't believe that those mobile units, the LPRs that get pictures of the front and the back, the front that's so that you can use, get the pictures of who's in the car. I think Belle Meade does or did do something like that. It needs to be fixed because you need to be able to get a shot of the front and the back at the same time from different angles. So my understanding is that you can't do that with the mobile LPRs, but it's a concern on a larger scale.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yes. If you don't mind, if there aren't other questions, I do just want to, say that I really think that this substitute is an improvement over the status quo. Right now, it's Wild West with these readers that could be held, mounted on a patrol car or held within a patrol car, and I think it's to our benefit to build these safeguards around it. The ones that are already in the bill, the ones that Ms. Kong mentioned, that we might need to add to it. I think that while I think the Johnston bill is a worst case scenario, but I would say that the status quo isn't ideal. This isn't perfect, but I think that this is the best that we've got. And I think it would be helpful to see this go into place so we can really get an idea of if and how they're, and honestly, once the mobile LPRs aren't being used yet. And once you limit the uses, you start wondering whether they'll be implemented if they can't be used for a huge range of uses. So it could be protective in that way too. So I'd certainly appreciate any additional thoughts throughout the whole process and any support that you can offer to get the best solution through that we can. So, and hopefully allow the focus to shift to better topics.
Thank you, Councilmember Rosenberg. I am having some technical difficulties, so I switched to my phone, so I can't actually see if somebody's has their hand raised or had a question.
Nobody has their hand raised currently, Chair.
Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, I guess we can wrap this up. Well, I did want to say that my concern with license plate readers has been the lack of community engagement. There have been several community conversations, but no real forum for public input on this. And it seems like we're moving way too fast on a really important issue that the public should be weighing in on. And I don't think that any authentic community engagement can be conducted during the pandemic. So I just think we're moving too fast on this, and we shouldn't move forward with LPRs. There's no other.
I agree. I think that the substitute here is trying to take a step back on the LPRs, and that's something that's appropriate to do right now, so that while we're in this space where we can't really engage the community and have a long-term conversation about this in concert with discussions about real reforms, I'd hate to see that dead time used to really ramp up use without any kind of guardrails about it. And my hope is that we can replace the Johnston bill with this one, and then consider whether everyone thinks it's a good idea to get it through and build those guardrails versus what we've got now. But I appreciate your point, and I agree.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Councilmember Rosenberg.
Thank you very much, and thanks so much for your time. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. I wanted to engage the board, or the executive committee at least, on whether you think that the Community Oversight Board should take an official position on any of the pieces of legislation or on license plate readers as a whole.
Dr. Kane has their hand raised.
Thank you.
Thanks for the tag team effort there. I'm so glad that you brought that up, Chair Martinez, because I raised my hand actually before you said that to bring up something separately, just the pace that this is moving at. And it's just kind of alarming that something like this is headed down. So I would absolutely support the board sending a letter to the council outlining concerns. I'm not sure exactly the approach, if it's whether specifically on the two bills or overall concerns about LPRs, but I do support the idea of your letter.
Thank you, Dr. Kong. Any other input or opinion on taking a position?
No hands raised right now, but I would like to say, thank you for that, Dr. Kong. I would like to say I also support like sending a letter to City Council, but I think it should also be coupled with something from our research team. I'm not sure if this is enough time, but if it's something just around like the effects of license plate readers on community members, because there have been license plate readers out here for years, so there's an overwhelming amount of data associated with them about how they adversely affect poor and working class people. So maybe add some official facts around these license plate readers, because what I found startling about what the city council member had to say, which I thoroughly appreciated, is that we know that these license plate readers are a tool to harm people. But yet, it feels like a lot of folks are looking to these things as solutions. So we're already dealing in a situation where there's some cognitive dissonance here. And there's a lot of learning and education that needs to take place. So I'm just like, how can the board begin to educate people on how these license plate readers have affected other communities that are not just Mount Juliet, right? Which we know Mount Juliet don't look like the majority of Nashville or Belmead, but there are in areas that look like Nashville. Just something off the top of my head. Board Member Goddard's hand is raised.
Thank you. Yes, I would support that as well in terms of trying to balance speed and getting some research. I think if we've got some research that's been done and that could just be summarized without the usual citing of specific reports and this or that necessarily would be helpful with the report. I'm not trying to dump a bunch of work on staff, but if they're knowledgeable enough about that to plug that in, that would be good. And I think a letter that raises the concerns that needs to be addressed rather than supporting a specific one of competing bills may be the better way to go on that. But that's just a thought. I'm not enough politician to know.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. I am inclined to agree with you. I don't know if the board has an appetite for supporting a specific piece of legislation, but I think outlining our specific concerns with what the legislation that is being proposed will do, the effects it will have in our community would be really impactful, and I think could, inform some council members about the decision here. Director Fitchard or Dr. Villier, any insight into this, or how does this sound to you?
I think it sounds great. I absolutely agree with you. I think that this needs to be slowed down. I mean, there's so many other pressing issues in Nashville. And, I can't say enough about having crisis intervention teams, especially since we just had a woman that had a mental health problem and called for help and was shot by Metro Police. And so my concern is that if we're going to start putting money into, anything as it pertains to public safety, it should be the crisis intervention teams.
Thank you, Director Fitchard. What timeline do we have on this? I know that the bill is up for second reading on April 20th, so we have to act pretty quickly here.
Chair, we have two hands raised.
Thank you. I can't see who has their hands raised.
I think Dr. Valliere and Dr. Kong have their hands raised.
Okay.
I'm not
Dr. Valliere, yeah. Dr. Valliere, go ahead.
All right, thank you. So in just thinking about what Director Fitchard and Chair Martinez said about the potential of working on a letter, if there's not specific policy recommendations, then by the process that was laid out by the board, it is possible that we could work up a letter based on, the evidence that we have, and we've been looking into LPRs over the past few months. So we do have information collected, and we could help create a summary letter that could go to the board that the board can just issue, since it would not be making specific or it would not go through the official approval process, and a letter could be issued.
Thank you, Dr. Valliere. And Dr. Kong?
Yes, just one more comment. This is sort of going off of Mr. Campbell-Gooch's comment around just the lack of community involvement. And I'm wondering, and again, I know the staff is very busy, and I don't also mean to pile on or ask for more work, but I'm wondering if there's any way, either working with community liaison with Frenzy or other staff to do some sort of town hall event or something just specifically on this issue, something public facing, and able to invite community members to be able to educate them as a COB event. I'm not familiar with the process and how that all works, or if that's possible, but would love to help facilitate if that's something that's possible.
Thank you, Dr. Kong. Yeah, we've had a few community forums that we've conducted virtually since the pandemic started. But my concern is that that's not enough, and that's not going to reach people that we need to reach. Thinking that the use of technology and access to all these resources might be difficult for some of our community members to access. But it's something I think that we should explore in the coming months, assuming, well, I guess it depends on, what happens with the legislation. But since it is in a week and a half, I don't know if we would have time to put together something to hear from the community.
Thank you for that.
Can I interject real quick? When it comes to those town hall meetings, those aren't easily put together. It takes a lot of concerted effort because we have to kind of connect with MNN. We have to have our staff in two different places for things to work out, and they have to be able to call in. We have to be able to advertise it. So it's not something that can be done like within a couple of weeks. Because MNN has to. We have to actually work around their schedule, and then we have to, set this thing up. So I would say we would need at least a month out to be able to even have something that would, I think, be, enough time to make certain that communities are notified, as well as connect with MNN to get on their calendar.
Thank you for that, Director Fisher. It feels like there's going to be like a pretty extensive list. Dr. Kong, you still have your hand raised. Did you want to? Okay. And then Dr. Valliere, did you still have a comment? I see your hand is still raised as well. Okay. So the next person with their hand raised is Judge Brown.
Go ahead, Mr. Brown.
Have to unmute. Sorry about that. It's been an interesting discussion, both from previous council member and this member. I'm new to this process, but is it possible to get a link to the actual bills? I always hate to comment till I see the actual language of something. And I mean, obviously, at least from my viewpoint, there are some good points about license plate readers. But on the other hand, there certainly could be some abuses, you know, and councilman that went through a list of horrors there. And there's also, I'm sure you could come up with a list of things where license plate readers have, you know, found a missing child and has been a very beneficial thing. So it is an issue that has both pros and cons. But is it possible to be sent a link so I can actually read the language in these bills?
Absolutely. Director Fitchard, I think, I don't know if the entire board was CC'd on the email you sent this afternoon, but we can definitely send those pieces of legislation to the rest of the board.
Yeah, I'm sending what I sent today to Judge Brown and Mr. Hayes right now. And then I can also include the link to those bills. Not in this email, but in a subsequent email.
Thank you, Director Fitchard. So in terms of process here, it sounds like we would want to write a letter about our concerns with license plate reader legislation currently in front of the council right now. If we get our research team to come up with a few facts or, you know, points that we can use in a letter, we would have to issue the letter at least before the 20th. Is that something that we need to vote on? Is it something that the entire board needs to vote on? I welcome some thoughts on that.
And Chair, this question is posed to the board members who are on the executive committee, correct?
Correct.
I think general inquiry about both the speed of the license plate readers and also asking for more community engagement. I don't know. I mean, I'm curious on what other council member, board members think, but I don't think that is like something that is like so far out that we would need to get like full consensus and have a vote. But I'm not sure on these things. I'm curious on what other people think as well.
That's what I'm thinking, but happy to take any other comments here. Mr. Hayes? Muted, Mr. Hayes.
Have to keep remembering that about that mute button. But anyway, yeah, I fully support some type of letter to outline our concerns to the council. And I'm fine with either way. If the executive committee would like to make the decision or they like to defer it to the board, it sounds like time is of the essence, though. So I'm okay with either way.
Thank you for your input, Mr. Hayes. So I think, Mr. Goddard.
I was just going to say, I think exactly that on the timing. I think the letter should come from the chair, and I think it would be helpful for the chair to have a vote of the executive committee authorizing that. That's what I would do.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. Well, I think that's a good idea, and I would ask for a motion if somebody wants to propose one.
I was hoping that member Goddard would restate that as a motion.
All right, I'll give it a shot. I move that the executive committee authorize the chair of the board to write a letter to Metro Council expressing the concerns that have been discussed in the executive committee today with license plate readers. Period.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell-Gooch. Any focused discussion? Mr. Hayes, I see your hand up, but I think you're... All right, I'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Campbell-Gooch?
Aye.
Mr. Goddard?
Aye.
And Dr. Kong?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. So I will work with our team here to write a letter to Metro Council as soon as possible, and definitely before the Metro Council takes up license plate reader bills on second reading on April 20th. Anything else on that? If not, I think I can barely see the agenda on my phone. New business and announcements is next.
Yes, I have a couple things I want to present or talk about with the executive committee, just to kind of keep you all in the loop of what's happening. So the first thing is I met with Chief Drake and his executive his executive team on Monday regarding, I had a conversation with him 2 weeks ago regarding the release of a video that was involving the shooting, the MMPD shooting death of a community member. And so he invited me to come in, and they created a policy regarding that video and how videos would be released. And so they have a new SOP regarding that. It says prior to the release of body-worn cameras, within 72 hours of a critical incident to the media or general public as part of the media release, absent exigent circumstances, like, for instance, a suspect is at large, the Office of Public Affairs will coordinate notification to the following: the Criminal Investigation Division, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, the Office of Professional Accountability Director, as well as the MNCO Executive Director or Assistant Director. Initially, the language omitted us from that first notification part, and it had us in a second category with a bunch of other people. And I really just had to push back on that because our job here, the reason why we were even created is to provide that kind of oversight. And so he was very willing to change it, and that's what they did. And so that is a new SOP, so that before video camera information or body-worn camera is released to the public, we will have an opportunity to view it. So that's the first thing. Do you guys have any questions about that?
I do. Was there any conversation around the production of the video? And the reason I asked that is because that was the most shocking thing to me, is that somebody took their time and produced it, had an intro with music, and it just seemed a little strange. So I'm just curious, were there any conversations around the actual production of the video?
Yeah, so once I saw that video, and just to put things in context, we never saw the video before that release came out. And so I was a little disappointed in how that process worked. And I think that is what I expressed to Chief Drake when I called him personally to express my disappointment in the fact that we didn't get to see the video. We saw the same video that the public saw. And, so we had a long conversation about that. We also had a small conversation regarding the production of it and how it was put out to the community. So yes, we did have a conversation about that. Mr. Aaron was in this meeting that I had on Monday. I did talk to him about that and what the effects on the community when those types of things are put out into the community and how the production was done and what my thoughts were on that. So yeah, I made them all aware of that. We did have a conversation around that.
Okay, thank you. And then just like one more curiosity is I know that the original video was cut and like edited and put together. It wasn't like one constant stream of a video, if my memory is correct. So was there any conversation around when they do release a video, if they're going to release the actual full uncut video, or will it always be some like, I don't even know if I'm asking it right. Will there always be some like clipped combination of some weird video that they just kind of put together?
Yeah. So we did have a conversation about that as well. And I, expressed what I thought would be, in my opinion, what would be the most helpful for the community to be able to see what happened and to formulate their own opinions. And so we did talk about that. Ultimately, the police department is in control of the video, so they can do what they want to with it. But I did express that having video footage unredacted, unedited would be probably the best route to go. Now, with that being said, in the midst of a criminal investigation, I can't say to you that that's what they're going to do. I mean, it is an open investigation. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation is investigating it. And so I don't know exactly how much would be limited to public viewing. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did fully. Thank you for that. And I appreciate you being willing to be in those spaces and like have those conversations.
Thank you. If there aren't any other questions about that, the second thing that happened this week was, and for the new members, you won't know this, but last year we had some notification issues with getting notifications from the Emergency Communication Center. And so the gentleman his name is Director Stephen Martini. He was new when we were having this new notification problem last summer, where we weren't getting the full notification of officer-involved shootings, and just information was missing that I thought was really pertinent to what we needed to know so that we could respond to the scenes. And so Mr. Martini, Director Martini, got with the mayor's office. They had to order some software upgrades. It's been a long process, and it's been, I'm sure, a costly one out of their budget to get this information for the COB to be able to get the kind of notifications that we needed. And so they have this new notification process. It's directly for us. It is to receive notifications directly from the CAD, which is the computer-aided dispatch system. This is an upgrade, and so they are working on the implementation of it. We are now in a testing process, and they are training their staff on how to send those notifications to us. We received a test. It was different for us to, of course, it has completely different information. And then we received, I think something, I'm not sure whether it was a test or whether it was actual, to be honest with you. I know that we're in a testing phase, but it was really, I appreciated it. I liked it because it had enough information where we wouldn't have to continue to call DEC to get, more information. And so what was happening is when we got a notification, the notifications just had a very limited amount, because it's a text message. It has very limited amount of information. And so we would be, we would have to call the supervisor's line to get more information on what was happening. And so this gives us a little bit more information so that we don't have to make calls to DEC at 1, 2, and 3 o'clock in the morning. And so that is underway, and we're very happy with it at this point. You have any questions about that? Okay, and if not, I'm going to move on to the last new thing. So there's some required training for board and commission members. I received an email from HR on Friday afternoon In the HR training division, it says has an initiative to have all boards and commission members complete their required training by June 30th, 2021. And it says this training provides a concise overview of Metro's policies and practices on sexual harassment prevention and diversity and inclusion. It says they will be communicating directly by email to the board and commission members who have not completed their training. The training dates, the sessions are April the 28th at 10 a.m., May 26th at 10 a.m., and June 30th at 10 a.m. I'm going to send all this information out, the same email to each one of the board members, and then you would connect directly with HR and send this back to Mr. Essery to set up a time for you to complete this training. And just remember, it is required training. So that's all I have, unless there's questions.
Thank you, Director Fitchard. Any questions or any other new business or announcements? If not, I think I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell-Gooch. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. I'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Campbell-Gooch.
Aye.
Mr. Goddard.
Aye.
And Dr. Collin.
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Peace, y'all.
Thank you.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.